Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Got a couple of questions here for you to answer, if you don't mind introducing yourselves. If you would let us know your institution, and if you are in a teaching role, what discipline, and if you're in a non-teaching role, what is your role? And then the second question is, where are you signing in from today? Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Sarah. Hey, Rob.
Welcome, everybody.
Share your role with us, where you are in the world. Boston.
There's the questions again. If you just joined us, there's a couple of questions pasted in the chat for you to introduce yourself.
University of Iowa.
All right, Berkeley College, Sarah, thank you. Teaching about human relations, that sounds quite interesting.
That does sound interesting.
All right, we have Samantha joining us, nursing instructor. Mary, a grad biology instructor. Welcome, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, I pasted these questions in the chat. If you just joined us, you can see the questions that folks are answering as they're coming in.
And we'll probably get started here in maybe a minute or so. We're excited to share with you today. Kennesaw State. Welcome, Julie. Thank you, Crystal. Sinclair College.
Well, Katie, we've got quite a wide variety of disciplines and locations and eclectic group joining us today. Thanks for being here today, everybody.
And it'll be fun. It should apply to everyone here. That's our goal.
All right, so thank you for introducing yourselves. We will introduce ourselves in just a moment, but first of all, we would like to welcome everyone. Just thank you so much for joining this webinar today. Before we begin, we would like to just take a moment and recognize your work as educators and the steep challenges that you faced over the last year and a half. You made it. Now that finals are done, it's a good time to take a deep breath. So can we just take a couple of deep breaths together to acknowledge truly what a feat this last year and a half was for you and your students, just together. So the challenges, they may have had to do with learning to use new technologies. They may have been deeply personal, but for many instructors, the biggest challenge was delivering effective remote assessments while maintaining strong learning outcomes for their students. So whether they were evaluating their student learning via some kind of answer sheet with open-ended questions, essays, handwritten diagrams, problem-solving questions, the problem was the same. Instructors spent too much time on their grading, and they often could not effectively assess and improve student understanding with the traditional tools they had in their back pocket. So who identifies with this? Can you give a reaction in the one of the Zoom reactions, a thumbs up? Does this sound like a familiar scenario? Thanks, Mary. Megan identifies. Thank you, Gladys. Thanks, Rob. Linda. All right. Latrice is crying. Okay. So let's start. Katie and I would like to introduce ourselves before we get into the session today and tell you what it's all about. So my name's Lynn Riverstone. I have been with Turnitin on the Gradescope team for just a few months since March of 2021. Before joining the company, I was a university academic technologist on the central IT team. And through the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, I had the privilege of working with a team of CTL, eCampus, and academic technology colleagues to support instructors in that quick shift that they had to make to remote teaching. Like many of you, we helped them learn about online and blended pedagogies, strategies for engaging remote students, and assessing their learning, as well as new ways to employ digital tools. So I've been in the trenches side by side with folks like you, and I understand much of what you've faced during this last year. Being here with you today to reflect back on the year and look ahead to the next carries great significance to me personally. Get a little choked up. So prior to my role in IT, I had spent over 20 years teaching mathematics at the university and community college level, as well as teaching teacher professional development. A significant part of my work focused on facilitating faculty learning communities, and we'll say a little bit more about why that's significant today, and on facilitating professional development for pre-service and in-service K-12 math teachers and higher ed faculty in all disciplines. Faculty learning communities are a great interest and passion of mine and very close to my heart. So that's me. Now, Katy, my colleague, will introduce herself.
Thank you, Lynn. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here with you today and facilitating this webinar with you, Lynn. I have been at Turnitin for 9 months now. In my role, I work really closely with instructors on implementing Gradescope in their courses. And I also work with institutions on successful adoption and implementation of Gradescope. Before joining the Turnitin team, though, I taught math at the university level for 5 years, where Gradescope completely transformed my teaching and my students' learning. So I now get to do it for a living, and it's just too fun. During my time as an instructor, I did a lot more than just teach math. I developed and redesigned many courses online, face-to-face. I was a course coordinator for many years. I managed a learning assistant program. And one of my favorite things I did was teach professional development and career development to science majors. And I, like most of you here, was in the middle of teaching a normal term when the world went into lockdown. So just before our campus went remote, I worked with colleagues in my department to create a plan and put together resources to help support faculty that are shifting to Zoom classrooms overnight. And as someone who had taught online classes for years, I was happy to help those that didn't have that same experience. And then throughout the next 2 terms, I watched as our campus, our college, my department, and all of my colleagues work tirelessly to support teaching faculty. It was really amazing, and I'm sure you witnessed something similar. So we've learned a lot over the last year and a half, and I'm excited to be here with you today, where we get to spend some time reflecting on our teaching practices over this time. So what's our plan? Let's take a look at the agenda. Today, we're going to present a protocol, which is based on a model of reflection that was designed specifically for reflecting on and improving teaching practices. So we hope this model will be helpful not just for today and for this exercise, but that you can take it for your future work and do it within your own faculty learning communities. We will then illustrate how this reflective model works. We'll use an example that's probably familiar to most of you, either through your experience as an instructor or a teacher, a student, as an administrator. And I'll actually be sharing an assessment related challenge I faced as an instructor. We will walk through the model, we'll take pauses, we'll give you a chance to reflect and write about your own challenge related to assessing student learning. And finally, we'll have time for some Q&A.
And I'll just mention a couple of housekeeping notes. So please feel free as we go along to put any questions into the chat as they arise, or use reactions, a thumbs up if we discuss something that resonates with you. As we go through the session, we'll invite you to engage with some Zoom chat and some polling. And we'll also ask you to do some reflective writing. So if you want to go ahead now and take out something to write with, or open up a doc to type your notes into, we won't use these just yet, but you could get set up. Our colleague Alexis is here with us today, supporting our webinar, and she's going to put a few links into the Zoom chat So if you want to grab those resources as we go along, you may want to open up your chat box too. All right, so I'm going to talk about our protocol for reflection today. Excuse me. So as educators, we understand that critical reflection is a key part of our students' learning process. And similarly, reflecting on our own teaching practices is key for our own growth as instructors and just continuously improving our teaching practice. So these three questions, what, so what, now what? This is a protocol which is based on the Driscoll what model that's described in the Cambridge Reflective Practices Toolkit that we use to design this webinar today. And Alexis will put a link to this toolkit there for you in the chat if you want to check it out. But it consists of working in a small group to consider a challenge or a situation, why it's important, what's important and why it's important to solve it, and then any possible next steps towards a solution. So you can learn more about the model in the toolkit, and I will share Alexis will share a couple of additional resources in just a moment. First, let me just say a bit more about the word protocol. So this is how this organization, National School Reform Faculty, defines the word protocol. The protocol for the what, so what, now what protocol, it puts some additional structure around the reflective model that is described in the Cambridge University Toolkit I just mentioned. And the structure allows colleagues to really dig deep into a teaching challenge that's being presented. So for any of you who haven't used protocols before, and for the first time for anybody, it really can feel kind of too formal or even somewhat forced, but the structure provides a way to just efficiently uncover problems and solutions and for colleagues to learn from one another. All right, so Alexis should paste a couple more links in the chat for you. The first one is a link to the webpage that's quoted here, the NSFR webpage. NSRF webpage, excuse me. And then the other is the full details of the protocol that we will be working through. Just a quick disclaimer, neither Katy nor I are officially affiliated with this organization, the NSRF, National School Reform Faculty. However, the resources on their website have informed and inspired our work within our own faculty learning communities, as well as this webinar. For the purpose of this short webinar today, Katy and I are going to briefly introduce and illustrate what, so what, now what, but in practice, a faculty learning community facilitator would introduce a protocol like this only after taking time to establish the learning community by doing things like, deciding on shared goals and shared learning needs, and then setting some ground rules, otherwise known as norms of interaction. Some common ground rules might include things like asking genuine questions or making sure you listen to understand your colleagues. How we may show up for the community could be something like make sure all voices are heard. So why is it important to do this type of work ahead of time? It's because discussing the challenges we face in our teaching can be very vulnerable work. As teachers, we're often presenting ourselves as experts, and just admitting that we're not always an expert or that we face struggles in our teaching can put us in a very vulnerable position. And so it requires laying a foundation of trust first. So we haven't done that today, but just know Katy and I have worked together for a long time, have developed a strong trust. All right, so now we're going to start the reflection process with Katy and me first walking through the first two parts, the what and the so what part of the protocol. And we're just going to show you how it works. And then we will ask for your help and participation with Katy's example After that, after you see how it all goes, we'll pause for a couple of minutes so you can reflect and write about your own what and so what. So we'll begin with Katie's what. So here are 2 reflection prompts, different options to think about for the purpose of today's activity. So Katie, and eventually each of you can choose to focus either on option 1, which is an assessment practice you tried while teaching remotely that you'd like to continue doing when you return to the classroom in the fall. So maybe you need to think about how to adjust a remote assessment strategy to the in-person setting, say. The other option is, what assessment practice did you do away with while you were teaching remotely that you would never want to do again once you return to the classroom in the fall? So Katie, which option are you going to go with?
I am going to go with option 2, and I'm choosing that because I have an example of an assessment practice that I did do away with and that I wanted to a few years ago, and I want to share that. But before I say more about this specific assessment practice, I want to see how many of us here are familiar with assessments that are formatted in this way. So a bubble sheet for multiple choice questions and an answer booklet for free response questions. So we just added some images to the screen and you can see some examples. And Alexis just deployed a poll. So go ahead and select which of these apply to you. And just know that that image does show typed work. And in my case, specifically, that free response portion was what's handwritten work. Looks like we've got about 9 responses so far. Thank you. Give it a couple more seconds. Curious to see if you all are familiar with this. And we'll be sure to share the results. Any other last minute votes? All right, here we go. It looks like we were pretty familiar with this as a student. Yeah, I think this was my entire college career, taking exams like this. So 86% of you familiar with it as a student, and 21% have actually given exams in that way. Wonderful. Thanks for participating in that. And I think we're gonna do our role play now, Lynn.
Unmute. Okay, so before Katie continues with sharing her assessment related challenge related to this kind of format, the 2 components, the bubble sheet and the answer, booklet, before she shares her what, in other words, I want to explain what we're doing. So for the purpose of this example, Katie and I are going to play the roles of Katie will play the role of the reflective teacher and will present or explain the assessment practice she wants to work on. And then her so what, which is why it matters. And then I will play the part of a group member in her small group who asks clarifying questions to make sure we understand the dilemma Katie is trying to solve and why it's important to do that. And then we will invite you, all the participants here today, to ask some more probing questions to help Katie surface all the reasons why it may be important for her to find a solution to this particular challenge. Okay, so here we go. Katie, would you go ahead and tell us about your what, please?
Yes, so my assessment practice that I wanted to do away with a couple of years ago is related to that Zoom poll I just asked. And without even explaining it at all, many of you were really familiar with the bubble sheet, answer booklet, assessment format. I too really familiar with that, gave exams this way for years, and it was my primary way of assessment for exams when I was teaching college algebra. And before remote teaching, it was really common practice for many instructors to give an exam in class, in person, with 2 parts, multiple choice section, pre-response questions. And formatting exams like this makes it efficient and fast to grade the multiple choice section like a bubble sheet because it can be machine graded and it's quick and it's accurate. And the free response portion allowed me to assess at that higher level of student learning outcomes because I could ask open-ended questions, problem solving, show your work, essay type. And that's mostly what I wanted to ask. So I kind of got the best of both worlds there. And that is my assessment practice that I want to do away with. That's my what.
I shouldn't mute myself in between. Okay, great. Thank you, Katie, for explaining what you're going to focus on, the assessment practice you don't want to do. So now, just to make sure I understand what Katie wants to work on, getting rid of that 2-component exam approach, I might ask some clarifying questions or just reflect back what I heard her describe. So this is, I might say something, excuse me, like, Katie, you mentioned efficiency of grading and accuracy of grading with this approach, especially for the bubble sheet part. And then your ability to assess higher level thinking with some free response questions on your exams. So how important is it to you when you find a new approach that you still have the efficiency piece and the free response piece?
Yeah, I would say it's absolutely critical. So the not totally time consuming every second that I have with grading, but also not just giving a straight multiple choice exam. It's really important.
All right, good to know. So can you just say a bit more about, like, why does it matter to you to do away with this assessment practice? You said what you want to keep about it, but why is it important to change this?
I think it comes down to the types of questions I can ask. So this 2-component approach really limits how I can ask questions, what format they can be in, and I'll describe a little bit more. So for the bubble sheet section, let's say, there's limitations on number of correct answer choices, number of total answer choices, how to assign partial credit, how to give feedback. There's limitations there, even though it is fast. And the multiple choice section being completely separate from the free response portion, it makes it difficult to ask 2 questions right after another or related as different parts on the same exam because they are so separate. So ideally, I would make my assessments better by including question types other than multiple choice and other than free response. So things like matching, short answer, fill in the blank, diagrams, graphs, and be able to ask them in the order that I want to without having them separate.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like the reason that this matters to you, why it's important to change your exams from these 2 components, is you want more flexibility in how you assess your students, both the question types and the order that you can ask your questions. Did I get that right?
Yep, that does sound right.
Okay, so that's Katie's what and now what. Let's all of us now go ahead and at this point in Katie's reflective process, she's beginning to uncover why she wants to do this, make this change. We can keep probing further, asking more questions, getting deeper into the so what part of the reflection for Katie. So I asked some clarifying questions. We could ask some more open-ended probing questions. Knowing the why can really help Katie understand what solutions are possible for her at the next phase, the now what phase of the reflective process. So if you don't mind helping here, would you type some questions into the chat for us that you might ask Katie if you were involved in a faculty learning community to probe her thinking, get her to elaborate on why this matters, why finding a better approach to her exams is important. So here's some possible question stems that you might use.
And I'm ready to answer your questions when they come in.
Okay, Katie, I see a question from Megan. It says, when you give an exam in 2 parts, what are the issues with grading or giving student feedback?
Yeah, good question. As I mentioned a little bit with the feedback part for like the bubble sheet portion is that there really isn't any. I think with the grading, obviously, when you're grading that like booklet type answer booklet, that there's long answer, there's explain, show your work, and that still has to be graded, and it has to be graded across every student, hopefully in a consistent, unbiased way. So I'd say that's definitely a challenge with grading. Any other questions that came through?
Yeah, Amarjit wrote a great question. What I wonder is, can these two parts be combined?
Yeah, I'm glad that came up because I think this is another of my so what, like it's another thing that makes it important to me is right now they're being separate is cumbersome, taking that bubble sheet grade, taking the free response grade, totaling it up, combining it, and then putting it into the LMS so it makes sense to the students. So I think in an ideal world with the challenge I'm trying to solve, it wouldn't be that way. Good question.
Yeah, I missed Crystal's question. Are these tests formative or summative?
I think what I'm referring to now is summative, although I could see it being applied in other places too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then Gladys wrote the question, what I wonder about is what types of questions are not covered by the bubble or booklet type? What do students get out of different types of questions? What a great question, Gladys.
That's a really good one. Let me start with the first one. Questions not covered by either of the two. I think because there is the answer booklet option to have students freeform write anything, I think I really could put any question type in there. There could be matching, there could be sketch a graph, there could be, circle on a diagram, really anything on that end. It's just that's when the grading kind of becomes more intense because I'm not putting them on the bubble sheet. What do students get out of different questions, different types of questions? It's a really good question, and I would love to hear any other thoughts on this. I think from what I remember when I was coming up with assessments, let's say in math, there were things I wanted to get from my students, right? I wanted to assess a certain learning objective that could really only really be shown by writing on a diagram or labeling axes of a graph or explaining, like maybe I give them the correct answer to a question and they have to tell me how I got there or why. So I think there's definitely benefit in that variety of question type. But I'd love for anyone else to answer that too, or Len, if you have any thoughts.
Well, I just looked at our time, which is 11:27. So I think we might, because that is a very great question that you answered, Gladys. I probably will be thinking of that tonight as I'm trying to fall asleep. But I think we should give you all an opportunity to just take a minute to think and write for yourselves, because we wanted you to have practice with this protocol as well. So would you just take a moment of silent time to write down your what? That is, choose either option 1 or 2 and describe an assessment practice you want to work on, or if you're not teaching and working with faculty instead, that you might be faced with helping faculty solve and as fall term approaches. All right, and then once you've got your what, will you write down just a few quick bullets for yourself? Why is it important? What difference will it make for you or your students if you were to make this change in your practice? What if you didn't make any change at all? What difference would that make? So I'll just give you another quick minute to write here.
Lynn, I did want to just mention one question. So Mary had a question about the answers to these questions. So does this depend on whether you're teaching remotely or also in person?
Great question, Mary. Thank you. What do you think about that one, Katie?
I think my immediate kind of gut response is that when I'm thinking about an assessment challenge, it applies to assessment as a whole. But I could see where my what might be specifically focused on a way I was assessing remotely or a way I was assessing in person? It's a good question.
All right, why don't we go on now to Katie's now what? This is the next phase, the last and final phase of the protocol. So this is when the individual presenting their teaching dilemma to the other participants considers all the questions that they've posed, those great ones that you put in the chat, and reflects on possible next steps. So as a reminder, Katy had a two-part exam example. We heard her what and her so what. So she's getting rid of the bubble sheets and answer booklet format. She's looking for more flexibility in the types of questions she can ask, not just multiple choice and free response. She wants to address issues related maybe to some bias in the grading or being inconsistent in her grading. She wants the grading process not to be too time consuming and for the grade data to be accurate. And she also wants to provide robust feedback to her students. So before we hear Katie's actual now what, we'd like everyone to suggest some possible next steps she might take. And this will just be a quick suggestion in the Zoom chat. So what are some possible next steps Katy could take to solve her challenge? Okay, thanks, Megan. Megan says, Katy, you could ask colleagues. One of my favorites.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other ideas for next steps?
Would you like me to share what I actually did, Lynn?
Sure, great. Thanks, Katy.
Okay. So as I mentioned, this was an actual assessment challenge of mine. And so all of the so what that I shared was actually what I was experiencing a couple years ago. And through a practice of reflection, just like we're demonstrating here with colleagues I was working closely with, I tried a variety of solutions. So here's what I tried. One of the first things I did was bring the challenge to my teaching team, just like Megan said, ask colleagues. Along with that, I talked to colleagues around the university, maybe at a Friday afternoon happy hour, talking about my challenge. I researched strategies and practices in the literature and attended a lot of conferences. And then I finally decided on a change of an actual assessment change in how I was doing it. And, as I said, one of the problems was that cumbersome nature of the two parts. So it was a hassle for students during the exam. It was a hassle for me. So I decided I'm just going to do away with the automatically graded bubble sheet. I'm still going to have multiple choice section. My students are just going to write their answers on an answer sheet, and I'll just manually grade it. It won't be that bad. And then at least everything's in one place. Still have a free response section just as before. It was just in one exam. And while this solved part of the problem, it definitely wasn't quite as cumbersome having two separate components. It did surface some additional issues, as you can probably imagine. And what was that? Well, first and foremost, the change I made did not actually save me time or any hassle. It actually may have increased the time I was spending because I was manually grading, but had to give it a try. In addition, it amplified some other issues. The biased nature of grading. Now that I was grading everything manually, it brought to my attention how things could be really, really biased. This was due to the fact that my entire teaching team was now manually grading everything along with me, room for human error. You can see students' handwriting and their name. And then finally, this change didn't actually allow me to change up my question types or order of the questions and mix and match things at all. It was still divided into separate parts. So during this reflection and this experimentation stage, I was working closely with a graduate TA of mine, and she was actually studying higher math education. And she was aware of the challenge I was having. We talked about it a lot. And in the middle of one of the terms, she came to me and asked if I had heard about Gradescope. I was like, no, what are you talking about? And she said some of her colleagues in another department on campus were using Gradescope to grade handwritten work. And I was like, okay, let's see, let's give it a try. And it ended up, as I said at the beginning of this, it's probably not a surprise, it was an absolute game changer for me. It helped me to go beyond this 2-component exam approach, ask any assessment type that I wanted to, and I'm excited to share with you. I chose 4 of my favorite aspects of it. So assessment flexibility. I was able to write questions in the way I wanted to, wasn't limited by any format, such as number of choices or number of correct answers. Wasn't limited in the order I could ask questions. If I wanted to follow up a multiple choice question with a please explain how you got there, I could do that. And because Gradescope significantly sped up the process for grading questions, all types of questions, other than just multiple choice, I could ask more of those more robust, higher level learning outcome questions. Short answer matching, proof, drawings, diagrams, and the possibilities for how I could assess student learning were really endless, and it was really up to me to be creative. Secondly, I did end up saving time. I used 2 different ways of grading in Gradescope. One was AI assisted grading, where Gradescope groups like answers together and then allows me to look at them and apply feedback to the entire group at once. And also because I was passing back the exams electronically, I actually saved valuable class time that would usually be spent handing papers back. Number 3 is it improved consistency. So dynamic rubrics that are at the question level allowed me and my teaching team to apply consistent feedback and point deductions for the exact same mistakes across all students who took the exam, across all sections, between all graders. And finally, absolutely reduced bias. Because the work was digitized, the student's name was not readily available anywhere. So it reduced the opportunity for any possible bias to be entered. And since every student is graded using that exact same rubric, every single student, it reduces the chance that some people can interpret the rubric a little bit differently. There are a few unplanned benefits like fine-grained data analytics to help me improve my teaching or pinpoint knowledge gaps, and maintaining a permanent record of digital exams, which was required by my department. So I wanted to show you an actual real life exam, maybe not too real life, it is just fake student writing, but this is a picture of my exam in Gradescope. And before I jump in here, I just want to kind of explain what you're seeing. So on the left is the student's work for question 13. Not a real student. This was actually Lynn's handwriting. And it has 4 related questions of mixed question type. So when I'm talking about the order and mixing up questions, this is kind of what I'm referring to. So you see 2 that are fill in the blank, a multiple choice, and a free response. And this absolutely wouldn't have been possible to connect all these parts of a question like this using the 2-component exam approach. And then on the right of the screen, you see the rubric. So this rubric is just for part B. So before making this switch, it most likely part B would have been a multiple choice question that was automatically graded by bubble sheets, and the students wouldn't receive any partial credit or any feedback. But you can see here in my rubric, if you're reading through it, it's quite robust. It allows for partial credit, it has the correct answer at the top, and it ultimately provides students with visibility into how their work and their classmates' work is being graded. So dynamic rubrics here in Gradescope made it fast, made it easy to provide really detailed, personalized feedback than was ever possible with a red pen before. So you're probably wondering, that sounds really great, but what does it actually take to implement something like this? So here were kind of the steps that I went through. It's actually pretty easy. On my actual exam, I made small formatting tweaks. So as you were looking at my exam, you saw that, for example, I asked a multiple choice question with 2 answer choices that were side by side. Other little things to just make it maybe more accessible for Gradescope. I produced 1 single PDF exam file and 1 single score for every student, delivered them to them in class on paper, and then took them, digitized them, and graded them in Gradescope using an assignment type in Gradescope that allows for templated work. So what about the grading? What is AI assisted grading? It sounds maybe a little bit strange. So how did it actually help and how does it work? Let's show you. So we're going to see a little video here. And what AI assisted grading does is it automatically creates answer groups like you're seeing. And then it allows you to apply feedback all at once and award points and custom feedback to that entire group. So we'll watch it again. Goes into the AI machine, comes out. We have 3 groups. We can edit the groups if we want to. And then we're going to grade. We're going to grade that group with 1 click. What about the free response? Because let's be honest, AI cannot handle everything. So for the free response, I used manual answer grouping. So I still grouped my papers just like I ideally would want to if I was doing them by hand. And as you can see in this image, you get a view that shows a little thumbnail of all student responses for a given question. And then I could take those, I could form groups of similar answers or similar mistakes. And you can see on the left, or sorry, on the right there, I have formed a few groups. And then just like with the other AI assisted grading, when you go to apply feedback, you actually can just give it a score and apply feedback all at once. All right, I think it's your turn. Len, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. All right, so now we've reached, we've gone through the whole protocol. You've seen Katie's what and so what and now what she wanted to do, and what she actually did end up doing to solve her assessment challenge. So we'd like you to think again about what assessment related practice you wrote down, your particular what and so what, and what's your now what? What possible next steps could you take toward a solution? So is there a small group of colleagues you could convene for a regular meeting to discuss teaching? Are there any professional organizations that you can look to for guidance related to your particular challenge? So we'll just pause for another quick minute and let you sketch a few thoughts on paper. All right. So that is what we had to present to you for content today. And we would like to take this opportunity to open it up for any questions you might have. I don't know if there's anything new in the chat that we haven't looked at. Or if you just want to go ahead and unmute and ask a question, that is also welcome. I'm curious, would you mind with a reaction in the Zoom, using the Zoom reactions? Do you think you might use a protocol like this in the future to reflect on your teaching practices? Katie loves it. I knew that one though. Megan, Crystal, thank you. Oh yeah, Katie, thank you. So Katie mentioned that we have a lot of different folks from different disciplines here. So she wanted to mention that the math question that was being graded in the AI answer grouping example, it could be a multiple choice question. It could be a text short answer question. It can be a math short answer. So it's not limited to just math or STEM type questions with the AI. All right, well, looks like we do not have any further questions, so I will jump to our final slide here. Well, two final slides. One is about some additional resources. So if you would like to get started using Gradescope, there's a link in the chat that Alexis will paste for you, and you can use this sign-up code, and this will get you access to Gradescope Complete. That includes all the features that Katie discussed today, the AI assisted and manual answer grouping. For any course that you want to teach for one semester, you can use this code. Just create your account using the link that's in the chat. If you're interested in learning more and actually seeing the ins and outs of how Gradescope works, We host weekly workshops, and you can sign up for that now if you like. Alexis will put another link in the chat for that. And then finally, we created a short blog post that you can review and download with quick tips on how to make a two-component exam in Gradescope into a single component exam. So we will also follow up with all of this, everything that was shared in the chat with you, along with the recording of today's session. So you can look for that by email. And I'll just say thank you so much for being here, all of you, to recognize the year we've all been through, and looking back and looking forward with us. If you would like to reach out, Katie and I would love to hear from you. Here's our contact information.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you get a little time off this summer.
Thanks, Vicki. Good to see you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.